without a doubt, I think it's by far the best league in the world.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League? Mission accomplished in the Premier League. The American
Scouser.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser TV's Premier League show. We are going to review Match Week 4. I am Gally. I am joined by my co-host, Bickler. Bickler, how the hell are you?
I'm good. I'm running on E, hence no green screen, hence why you're going to see my hair flow in and out of this spot tonight.
I mean, the fact that we see your hair flowing in and out is not something that is out of the norm. But the fact that it is kind of flowing in the green screen is outstanding. Speaking of people who might want a green screen, or maybe you need some type of a thesaurus to explain and or determine how it should go. But the 115 charges have started to be explained today to the independent panel. So, Paul, before we break down a little bit of what these charges are what is your emotional mindset as this starts? The first day of what will be many days of ridiculous speculation, no reporting, and real no news. Now that it's finally here, how do you feel?
Man, I don't know if this is just indicative of my work week so far, but I have absolutely no desire to know anything about this because I just want to I want the result to be disappointing in a detached, non-emotional way. I feel like I'm treating this like the presidential election where everybody loses anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just waiting to see what this thing looks like. I mean, we've known what's going on for so long. We've talked at length about the shady sponsorships, the sort of the flexing of the books here. And it's just the burden on the proof is on the EPL to go ahead and come out and really prove that this stuff happens. So I'm really reserving my judgment and my excitement regarding this going down. I think it's because I just don't have a whole lot of faith in the EPL in general that they'll come out and really have this thing buttoned up to the point where they can get a fair result for the rest of the league.
I do agree, and we'll get back to the comment about nobody wins, because I do think that no matter how this goes, that's what's going to end up being the end result. But when you look at the charges, right, to kind of high level it from 2009 to 2018, they're basically claiming for 9 years, City failed to provide accurate information regarding their finances. And then during those same 9 years, there are 3 different examples of them providing the fact that they didn't disclose accurate information around their manager's compensation structure, which basically means they're being paid by third-party companies, which is completely against the rules of financial fair play. They were found guilty, and this shouldn't be glossed over, for breach of UEFA's financial fair play rules, and they were given a 3-year ban from the Champions League. But because those rules were over 5 years old, they weren't within UEFA's statute of limitations. But the Premier League has no statute of limitations, and they're charging them for those 5 years and an additional 3 years of their sustainability rules. So in some ways, the Premier League is almost double downing on their fact that UEFA was able to get them to be proven to be at fault for breaching of rules. And because of a stipulation, they got away with it. But the Premier League is kind of saying, we don't have that stipulation, so we're bringing you up on those charges as well. And then, of course, there is the worst one of all, which I think is the most ridiculous, which is the failure to cooperate with the investigation. I mean, they've been telling you they're innocent all along. Why would they cooperate any more than they absolutely have to? So let's take those last charges out. I think my biggest thing is that the Premier League wants there to be charges Obviously, the Premier League wants to make a precedent. I know all the Twitter accounts are having fun. Like, Man City is found guilty. They're docking Everton 10 points. Like, those are all the great posts. And they're outstanding, by the way. Like, I saw one. Everton has won their appeal. Man City will face no charges. Like, it was just like outstanding stuff. But let's say they come down and they're talking like 10 weeks of the hearing, months for a verdict, and then both sides have a chance to appeal. So I feel like there's just as good of a chance a year from now we still have no resolution to this, even though they keep saying everything will be concluded by the end of the season. Is there any world that you see that being true?
Is there any world in where I see it going past this season?
Where it's finished by the end of the season. All accounts and like appeals, judicial system done. I just can't see it.
I can't either, just because we know enough about the legal system here in this country to know that like things take absolutely a massive amount of time. And it would hinge on the Premier League having an open and shut case, which like I think we would all be shocked if they were organized enough to do that, right? So yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if it was done this year for sure. I will say this: if it gets done this year, I don't think that's good for the league, because I think it means that City probably skates through on this thing.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think it goes further because City's lawyers aren't going to let it end until they've exhausted every single opportunity because they have the money. So let's talk about what's at stake. So what's at stake should City be found guilty? I mean, to be honest, I think it was on Sky Sports. The guy was like, everything. That's what's at stake. Like they've won, I think it's 29 major honors since 2008 when they took over. They had won 9 trophies in 130 years as a club before it. And I think if the Premier League is able to make any of these charges stick, even if anything more than a fine, if there's major points deductions, if they strip a title or two, if they do, I mean, God forbid they're expelled or they do something crazy with them, I actually think City has a ton to lose, but I think the Premier League has every bit as much to lose in this opportunity. Where do you come down regardless of how the outcome goes? Because I feel like it's a combination that City will be hammered for what they did to cheat, but the Premier League will almost look just as bad for the one fact that they allowed it to happen on their watch for over a decade, allowed multiple other clubs to start to follow suit. And then maybe the worst thing, at the end of the day, if they're found innocent, all the other clubs will think that they're just City getting by and cheating, and we all know there was smoke, there's fire. And if they're found guilty, City supporters are going to tell you they were innocent and being railroaded the whole way. So doesn't the Premier League almost lose here just on face that it had to come to this point?
Well, yeah, I think that's the point. I think the Premier League has already lost, right? And I think if I'm the Premier League, what has to happen here, for me, I either hope that they get, like for our American audience, I hope they either get the Southern Methodist treatment, like in that they just financially like cripple this program to the point where they can't really come back for a number of years, or I hope they go through with nothing. Like that's really what it is for me, because I think if I'm the EPL, you've already got egg on your face. To me, this is where you stop the bleeding, because you have to make the decision whether you care about the optics of what this looks like, which it already looks bad for them, or you're going to set a precedent that sovereign nations aren't going to be able to come into this league and treat teams like racehorses, right? Like, and I think that's the big thing for the Premier League. For me, if you're going to do anything here, and you know, I know this is going to get wrapped up in the legalities of all this stuff and what they can make stick, but to me, if they're going to go for this thing and they're really going to bring these charges, it's got to be something that puts City down in like the second, third tier of English football. and makes them really, really earn it back with financial restrictions in place. If not, forget it. It's already too late. You already have the Newcastle owners coming in. You already have all these other sovereign nations that are looking at these clubs and want to come in and get these clubs. But that's the thing. You've either got to be okay with the fact that they're going to come in there, operate in gray areas, treat these like their personal racehorses, or you've got to set a precedent. And I think really throughout this entire process, we're going to learn more about the Premier League than we are about City.
Yeah, and I have no faith in what we're going to learn about the Premier League other than that oftentimes they prove to make bad decisions. Speaking of bad decisions, let's talk about the VAR match week 4 in review. And there were a few calls this week. I don't think they were as bad as some of the other weekends we've had in the past, but let's start with arguably the biggest match of the weekend. I don't even think it was arguably the biggest match between Arsenal and Tottenham. There were a couple flashpoints in this one, none bigger or quicker than the Urian Timber potential red card when he stomped on the shin of Pedro Porro. Got a yellow on the pitch. Doesn't surprise me. Anthony Taylor shows a yellow. Doesn't surprise me. VAR decides you should maybe think about looking at it. Ultimately, the decision is not a red card. Paul, what say you?
Well, we're probably biased as the banner that hangs above our heads, but for me, if it's a red on Curtis Jones last year, it's a red here, right? I mean, it's the exact same friggin' tackle.
That was what I thought too. They tried to actually defend it today by declaring that it was different because he didn't come over the ball. He came down on the player. I think it's the league maybe realizing they made a mistake last year. I think it is the classic orange tackle. I think that was what we all said last year with Curtis Jones. If you see it in real time, you're like, ooh, it doesn't look good. You watch it in replay, it looks worse. If you watch it in real speed in replay, it doesn't look as bad. And I think you can make those same comments for this tackle here. I thought at the time it was good to keep the match 10-on-10 because it just felt like it was getting out of control anyways, and I didn't think that Spurs deserved to be a man up at that moment of the match. Though I do think that Timber is very lucky because I think on a different day he sees red for the initial tackle, and then there's nothing VAR can do. So for me, I don't agree with the call. I don't disagree with the call. I think if I put my bias, my Liverpool hat on, I recognize quickly that that's, something I want to see a red card for because that's been shown against us multiple times in the last couple of years. In this case, I'm not sure it was the bad call. I think it could have went either way. I just think it was bad refereeing all around when it comes to how Taylor and Atwell handled it. Same match. The Romero potential handball on the Vicario save where he knocks it up in the air and it bounces off his arm. It went to like a 1.5-minute VAR review, which I only have to say, F you VAR. Because if we're spending time for that to be questioned a handball, a goalie makes a world-class save. The ball bounces up, hits a defender who has no idea where the ball is in a natural position on his arm, and it came off the goalkeeper, which means it came off a defensive player, which means you don't even have to look at it for a handball. To me, this is what's everything wrong about VAR. I think they spent more time on that than they did the Timber red card, which just makes me question, why do we do this at all?
Yeah, it'd be one thing if they're like analyzing one part of that, but there are multiple reasons why it's not a handball, right? So you only need one. Only need one, fellas.
Unbelievable. Crystal Palace versus Leicester City. Mateta scores the first goal, and
we get possibly the worst angle on that play ever imaginable.
Pretty much, and Steve Cooper is obviously hanging on it. Ultimately, they use the angles they have, which makes them believe the player is onside based on where the offside angle lines are. Semi-automated offside may change all of this and will change this, but until we have it, we can't worry about what we don't have. I don't know what Steve Cooper ultimately. I always hate when a coach argues about drawing a match they're up 2-0 in.
Yeah.
Like when you're up 2-0
Right.
and you give up a bad goal, it sucks. But then when you give up a penalty 2 minutes into stoppage time, like it's shame on you. See out the match, score another goal, take possession. Like I don't want to say that call didn't change things, but ultimately, what do you have a bigger problem with? The bad angles that we don't get, or the fact that the goal was ruled off on the pitch, yet all plays are reviewed when scoring situations, and therefore the bad angle pulls it in. I almost feel like, once again, this is a mistaken application.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Like, it's just one of those things where, like, I feel like these things should be all going, if they're all going to review, like, why are we calling these, right? Like, for me, and I think the answer to that, Gally, is it looked clearly offsides to everybody watching it, even in real time. And if you look at Mateta's reaction after he scores it, he believes he's offsides too. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it is. It's almost like they thought it was like too smooth, and they were like, "Oh, wait, we gotta look." Like, and then we started getting into the forensics of it and like showing all the bad angles and stuff. So, yeah, I agree with you. Mistaken application. I'm usually all for keeping these goals, but I think this was one that they just kind of fluffed it all together. I still think it was off, right? Like no matter how much you draw that line, I still think it's off.
Well, this is where I come back to. In a world where they don't put their flags up early enough, for once a guy put his flag up, correctly called a goal off, right. And then we went to the replay because it hit the back of the net, and said, well, we don't have an angle that actually proves it was off, so therefore it has to be on. Like, what are we doing? Like, the referee actually made the call in real time correct on the pitch, and we're reviewing it based on poor angles and in turn turning it over. So, few other quick ones, all red card interpretations. Jack Stevens on Garnacho, Southampton versus Manchester United. In real time, I thought it was harsh. When they showed the replay, I was kind of like, well, he gets him like almost across the thigh with studs, and he's the last guy in on goal. So it's basically like, what are you doing here other than the lunge? Do you think Southampton is just kind of being targeted because they did have those couple times where they baited the teams into red cards earlier in the season, and now it's 2 weeks in a row with a red card against them that are both borderline? Do you think it's just they're starting to feel the pressure of being in the Premier League without a point and knowing how hard that is?
I don't think they're targeted. I don't know if it has anything to do with pressure. I just think these referees are programmed to make decisions on these challenges based on the height of the challenge, right? Call me old school. I think you can slow these down, and a lot of times they look like reds. To me, they're yellows. Like, I thought this was a yellow. I still stand by that. I'd still call it a yellow. Like, so here's my thing. Like, I believe it's a yellow. If somebody argues for a red, I can buy it too. Like, I get it, right? Like, I think it's one of those ones that's an orange, right? Like,
yeah.
And like, for me, it's like, I think the bottom line is if you're a player and you come in like that and you're that high, you can't be surprised if you get it, right? Like, I still think it's just a hard challenge. And the reason it's yellow for me is because of the angle of the challenge. Like, for me, that's a yellow card angle. But like I said, with the height and in the force going in, I get why it was a red.
So Manchester City versus Brentford. Wisa scores early in the match. Kovacic absolutely clears them out. I think it's the 42nd, 43rd minute of the first half. Wisa goes down, really bad injury on his ankle. He can't continue after the half. Kovacic sees yellow for the tackle. VAR reviews it for a potential red. What say you?
I mean, I think it's another border one. I'm more likely to give this one red. And I know you're not supposed to referee this way, but this is like the third or fourth challenge Kovacic has had like this.
Well, that's the issue I have. It's the player that did it where I would probably have the bigger issue with.
Yeah.
I quantified that when I wrote down BS tackle, not red, but dirty as shit. Like dirty as shit. You know what you're doing, and you are that guy. You're the enforcer. Rodri isn't playing. It's kind of your job at the moment, and it just felt lazy. It felt cheap, and it felt like an intent to injure a player, which is an area where I'd say like you could give the red, but again, I think it's that borderline. But I know he's dirty as a player. I know the play is dirty. And because of it, I hate it. Like I hate everything about the tackle.
You're not supposed to ref on reputation. You're not supposed to ref an intent. And like you see that challenge, and both of those things are the first two things you think about, right? Like I mean,
well, that's just what real life does and how it happens. And then lastly, in the Bournemouth versus Chelsea match, which happened so late in an afternoon on a day where I was already watching way too many hours of football, including Liverpool just capitulating against Forest at home. I was not watching a second of that Forest or of that Bournemouth Chelsea match, but I hear there was a red card, and I have seen the highlights. A red card shout for Sanchez clearing out Evanilson. Evanilson then goes on to miss the penalty, or Sanchez saves it, which is just brutal for them. Because instead of Bournemouth going up 1-0, they end up losing the match later to Chelsea 1-0. And it wouldn't have shocked me at all if Bournemouth goes up there in the first half, gets one early in the second half, and wins the thing 3-1. Instead, they lose 1-0 in a hard-fought match. The rule changes for me the last few years to like get rid of triple jeopardy. It takes a lot nowadays to get a red card if you are giving up a penalty. So for me, I'm not surprised they didn't give Sanchez the red card there. And he does reach up somewhat like he's playing the ball. So you could think he's trying to block the chip. Did you think there was a chance he'd see red there? I personally thought it was kind of like, I thought this was just VAR wasting time looking at things we don't need to look at. Because that to me looked like a foul on the pitch, a penalty, and a yellow card all day long. And we had to go to a VAR decision, which probably hurt the penalty taker.
Yeah.
For not being able to step up and kick the ball.
And this is a match with 12 yellows. I mean, it was insane. Like, it was like the grossest thing ever to watch that thing. I thought it was a genuine attempt on the ball. Just, and I'm with you, man. Like, I think it takes so much for a keeper to get a red these days, like a straight red. Like, it's got to be coming out with your studs up and catching somebody like Monty in the chest and not be City for it to be a red, or you've got to like come out on a clear goal scoring opportunity. Somebody beats you and you take them out, right?
Or
like
deliberate handball, these crazy ones that we see where they slide and they hits their hand and he's like, well, I got to set them off.
I think any sort of net collision that has any sort of appearance of a natural play on the ball is never getting a red. And that's what it looked like to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I would say for this week, of all the weeks, this might be the week where they had the least egregious mistakes. Like, I don't know if there's one where they have to hold their hands up and say we absolutely got this wrong.
Probably, week. If they're in an internal meeting, they're probably not happy with the Mateta one.
I think the Mateta one is about process and about angles and about how it happened. But I think overall, comparatively to the first few weeks where we had like glaring areas where we were like, wait, this is just an egregious use of VAR. This changed the outcome of a match. I don't know that happened here. So I think for once the Premier League's probably saying to themselves, great. I think the bigger issue is they just need to get to the point of using semi-automated offsides. But I can't wait for that to happen just for someone to throw in all their faces that 4 weeks of the season had different rules, and therefore we don't know if the outcome of games would be the same, which is just going to be even more comical than, this segment was. Let's talk about the matches that happened this weekend. We had a full slate across the Premier League. We are going to talk enough, unfortunately, about Liverpool, Nottingham Forest on our Monday night podcast. We are not going to touch on that match here today. I think we got to start where where I think you always start, which is how many weeks in a row can Everton have a 2-goal lead and find a way to lose? Everton 2, Aston Villa 3. So, as I might have mentioned on this show or on our podcast, I've been in this like huge knockout pool with tons of teams. It's gone on like 10 weeks long. I had Crystal Palace this week, and I should say it wasn't me, it was Kelly's entry, which means it goes further in any pool that we're in than mine. But Kelly had Crystal Palace this week, and she was finally eliminated. It was down to them or Brighton for her. So ultimately, either way, she was going home this week. But we went with Crystal Palace. A bunch of people went with a few people went Palace. Like 8 people went with Brighton. One guy somehow got this far in the pool without taking City, and he was so like living it up when Everton was up 2-0 because 3 people had Aston Villa, and he thought, I'm winning this thing with 3 teams going out, and I have the one team. I had City. We were down a goal in 20 seconds. I'm ahead. Holland's the greatest goal scorer. I got all this money. And then goal, mistake, and then absolute worldie by Duran. And, like, the guy's got 4 or 5 big goal scoring, like, either goals or assists so far this season. And they tried to sell him to everyone in Europe all summer long because the guy is a 2-cent dink all day long, moron. But, man, he's starting to prove to be a Premier League goal scorer in himself.
Well, this tracks to last year, too. I mean, last year he was getting subbed on and scoring bangers, too. So it's like he's just essentially Villa Zarigi for the next, like, however long they have him. But, yeah, it's interesting. It's like at what point does he force his way into this lineup? Because all he's doing is coming in scoring game winners at this point.
So, funny enough, you say that. At what point will Sean Dyche just force himself into being unemployed and maybe not employed again? Because I question whether or not this guy, and I know though someone will say, oh, there'll be a championship side ready to hire him. But his shtick started to run out at Burnley. I think this move was more about the club and the temperament, and they thought he could kick forward. It didn't work out. Obviously, it's not working out. We've always defended he'll figure out how to right the ship and keep them up, because I think at times we've been even duped into thinking he's actually a good football manager. Like, I'm getting to the point now where I think he's just a good soundbite. And ultimately, there's not much he can do. Like, has the game just purely passed Sean Dyche by like it did?
That's
like
exactly what I was going to say. I think that tactically he's a dinosaur. And I mean, when you looked at him, it was like these were the teams. Like, he had the teams where like he just wasn't going to concede a lot, and then they were going to get one on a set piece on you, right? But like the bottom line is like I think with the sort of shift to like the predominant sort of tactic with all these teams shifting to 3 in the back, and like just the way the game has changed so much from a tactical standpoint, I don't know that squaring up in a 4-4-2 with two banks of 4 does it anymore. And I think if you look at what he does from a philosophical standpoint, and you look at this year where he's conceded like the least amount of goals they've conceded in a match is 3. Like, I think it just points to the fact that simply the game has sort of advanced past that being an effective philosophy in football anymore.
Yeah, I just completely agree. Like I said, it's the Tony Pulis, it's the Martin O'Neills of the world. They're just, the game is just kind of you're a dinosaur. Unfortunately for you, it's not going to work. And, the lump it up, go forward, Route 1 football won't work in this league. You have teams that, like Southampton, playing a better brand of football than you. They may lose every match, but Like I'll bet when they play Everton, they score 2 or 3.
Mhm.
And I don't know that Everton can score 2 or 3 against anyone. So, they're going to have to figure something out quick, or it's going to get real late, real fast for them this season. And I couldn't imagine, like, they could literally be like the next Leeds, going down and not coming back up. I mean, to have a state-of-the-art English stadium and be playing in the championship next year and questioning like who you're playing against and how that's going to go. That's got to be a scary proposition. Almost as scary a proposition as probably being a Tottenham fan this morning, realizing that you got to play Arsenal without 2 of their 3 most important midfield players. A team that really hasn't done a great job scoring offensively, especially without Saka creating. You give up a goal on a set piece. You have all kinds of opportunity in the first half. You do very little with it. If you're Ange right now, is this more about trying to figure out what you need to do to get your team going, or is this about a mental rebuild of a very, very fragile side that could be ready to fall off the rails?
I mean, I think if I'm Ange, I'm focusing on I'm tossing this one. You've got to erase this one from your memory in terms of like I think you've got to look like I think the thing that concerns me about this, right, is they got beat the only way they were going to get beat, right? Like that was the one thing. Like you knew that Arsenal were going to sit back and try to counter you, and so you knew that essentially they were going to have limited opportunities. Their one place they could consistently beat you is on set pieces, and then that happens. Like I think for me, it's like they've got to go back to the drawing board, and they've got to like. And I feel like we've been talking about this with Tottenham for years. But they've essentially got to go back and retool and say, like, how do we, from a neutral position, create scoring opportunities consistently? And what is our brand offensively, right? Because I think, like, they've got so many good attacking weapons, but they just don't seem to have an identity. Like, where is this going through? Like, right? Is Son your talisman? Is it going to go through Son? Are you going to play wide? Like, are you going to use your wingers in your pace? It's like, are you going to start utilizing Brennan? Like, I think they need to look at the pieces they have and start building an identity and building off of that, because the way that they play and who it goes through seems to change week to week. And like, I know that's like, could it be tactically done that way? Sure. Like it makes you less predictable and stuff. Right. But like, it also seems like maybe you just don't have an identity and you're just figuring it out on the fly. And that's not great either.
Yeah. I think their biggest problem is they want to, they don't understand how to play. And I think part of their biggest issue is it's probably time to just sit Maddison down because he doesn't actually make them better. And I'd argue in some ways they might be better off playing like Solanke and Kulusevski through the middle with Johnson and Son out wide, and then bringing like Werner in later. They're better off when they play with their younger attacking players like the Ogbene kid that they signed from Burnley, and like the Bergvale kid looked really good early, and Archie Gray looked early, and then he got away from him because they had a couple rough patches, like which is what young players in the Premier League do. Mm-hmm. I just think he doesn't know who his best 11 is, and I think he's forced to play players sometimes that he doesn't want to play. And by those players, I basically mean James Maddison and Betancourt, which I don't think actually helped them. Like I think Maddison is just being proven to be an enigma wherever he is. And when he was in Leicester, it worked out. And there's no surprise that he left Leicester and they brought a guy like Dewsbury Haaland, who was more consistent footballer, and their team got better, playing in the exact same position, doing the exact same things Maddison did. Like, he's a highlight reel player that probably lets you down more than his highlights actually hit SportsCenter. And
he's like one of those guys that needs to be a 1C player. Like he needs like two alphas that he can play off of, right? And I think the problem is when you try to make him the guy in the midfield, like it doesn't work. He's got to be a complementary piece. Like, and I think that's the part is they just don't. They're trying to make him the guy, and I just don't think that he can do what you want him to do in that position.
4 matches in, City are the only team on maximum points. Newcastle and Arsenal have dropped one, and Liverpool and Villa have lost one. Everybody else has at least dropped points in 2 different matches. What jumps out at you, if anything, Paul, looking at this table? For me, not really anything shocking. All 4 of those top 4 teams are teams I thought would be vying, including actually all 5. I thought maybe Forest being up that high, but a shock win at Anfield makes that happen for you. But anything else here jumping out at you that you think is either sustainable or can't continue on the way it has gone so far?
I'm not buying Forest at 7 as long term, right? Like, I think Palace is better than 16, although, they haven't proven it yet. So we'll see there. I think, West Ham looks lower than I expect them, Tottenham too. So there's going to be some movement here, right? I think on the whole, though, when I look at this, when you look at all these red dots and stuff, and we've talked about how weak the bottom of this table is, but what we haven't really talked about is I think, like, traditionally the top of this table isn't as strong as it normally is, and like Liverpool included, right? I think, like, all these teams have significant weaknesses, and I think that, like, I feel like we were 3 or 4 seasons away from a top 4 that was pretty dominant top 4. Like, even though there might have been more parity, like, I thought they were better. Like, I just think the teams, like, in general, in the English Premier League right now, and maybe this just has to do as a result of all the matches, like, that have accumulated over the last few seasons in general. I just don't feel like, City included, I don't feel like any of these teams are the strongest versions that we've seen, like, over the last 5-10 years. Maybe Arsenal, right? Maybe, but they've shown some chinks too, and they're banged up now. So I just think when we look at this league in general, I even think the top of this table is not as strong as it typically has been.
Well, I'd agree. I think that's part of the problem why you see more teams up there and why you'll see some validity in it. I think there'll be surprises. I do think there'll be a few of those that'll jump up. I think the other problem is the bottom of the table is just so poor. I mean, we start talking about these promoted sides and just, the fact they've accumulated 3-4 points combined in, what is 4 matches each. That's just craziness. Yeah. They haven't even started playing each other yet, and they're not getting any points. So I just think that's really disheartening, because I think it's just going to lead to a much more watered down overall Premier League, which is not what anyone wants to see. Everyone talks about the league where any team can beat anyone on any weekend. But ultimately, like you said, nobody's playing well, including City, yet City's the team with 12 points on 12 because they got a guy who's scoring enough goals to outscore everybody else in the league. And I think that, to me, is what I think is going to end up being the difference. If you really look at it, it's the teams that are scoring goals right now, which are the teams that are accumulating points. And I know it's stupid. Oh, if you score goals, you win soccer matches. But it's a legitimate stance of why I think we're seeing what we're seeing. So we have a couple minutes left. Let's quickly preview next weekend and match week 5. I can't wait to see when Leicester starts to score after Everton goes up 2-0 and wins this thing 3-2. If I were Leicester City, I would be so excited that I have Everton, because that means I'll be the first promoted side to get 3 points so far this season. What do you expect Saturday morning, 10 a.m., when Bournemouth show up at Liverpool? Do you expect a rotated side? Do you expect a heightened, excited Anfield? Do you expect maybe a team coming off 2 mediocre performances, seeing how they have to play tomorrow in the Champions League on the road in Italy, a place they don't ever fare very well in?
Yeah, I think this was traditionally a spot I wanted to see some rotation when we talked about this last, and I think that based on last week's performance, we're not going to see as much as I had hoped for. So, I mean, I think it's a really important, potential 3 points against a Bournemouth side that's looked really pretty good this year, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it's a big match for Liverpool, much more so than for Bournemouth. And Bournemouth has got a real opportunity to come in here and make some noise. I think Liverpool, despite not getting the win this weekend, we'll get more back into that in our show. I didn't think it was as poor as obviously social media would lead you to believe. So I think they're going to come out. I think they're going to be sharper, right? I think I don't know. International break's always a weird one. I always feel like any momentum you have going into international break, you come back, and it feels like Mario Kart where you get the red shell from behind. And you're racing towards the finish line, you get shelled, and then people pass you. I feel like that's international break as a Liverpool supporter. So I think we'll get a couple matches under us here, get one more match in here, get back to full sharpness. I do think it's going to be a stronger side than I would have liked to have seen here, but I think you kind of have to if you're Arden.
Obviously, West Ham Chelsea will be a fun one. It always is when they play. West Ham seems to always put a performance in at the Bridge. Something about those London derbies, but we'd be remiss without spending our last minute on the program, and that's about what we have left here, Paul, to talk about the big one on Sunday afternoon or Sunday late morning here in the East time zone. Man City versus Arsenal at Manchester City. Should City win this match, what type of a statement does that put down to put up 15-15 and take, a 5th point off of Arsenal so far already?
Well, I think it would tell you what we already kind of feel, right? That they still, despite all the talk about them not strengthening and getting older and thinning out and having all these charges, they still have the crown, right? They've still got to have somebody come take it off of them, right? And they're not going to give it over. And I think that's what we all know already. Going against a really banged up Arsenal side, I think you probably expect Manchester City to do the business here. But I still think Arsenal is really good defensively, and I still think Manchester City is not as good offensively. If you look at the way they're winning, they're scoring goals, right? It's not pretty, though. They're conceding early pretty consistently, very similar to how Liverpool was last year. And so I do think there's some weaknesses here that Arsenal can take advantage of. I think it's going to be a great match. I kind of think this one's going to be a draw, personally. I think it'll be a low-scoring draw is my take on it, but I think it's going to be a great match. It's a blockbuster. It is the blockbuster slate. Either way you look at it this weekend.
I'd be absolutely all for a draw. I think it would be great both for Liverpool and for the rest of the league to give it a draw. I just feel like deep down, Arsenal come in, they'll play a low block, they'll try to do the same type of thing they did against Spurs, and they'll realize the difference is one team has James Maddison and Dominic Solanke, and the other team has Haaland and De Bruyne. And then if you stop those two players, they're still Foden and Grealish and Doku. And we say they're not as good offensively, and then they still trot out guys that just make plays. And, they got kids they could bring in. I think City will show their class late, and I think they'll get the victory. It'll probably be a 2-1. It'll probably be disturbing. It'll probably be a Haaland brace on his way to setting the Premier League record for scoring goals. And people will just be waxing poetically about him, and it'll be great. And who knows, maybe Rich from our Discord channel will be right with his prophetic statement that Haaland will set the record for goals scored in the Premier League, and then next year set the record for goals scored in the Championship. And it would be pretty awesome, as no player could ever do that in back-to-back seasons. But speaking of something that everyone needs to do, you need to get over to the YouTube channel now. You need to subscribe. You need to hit all the likes, the subscribes, all the happy buttons, none of the negative ones. Check out the morning shows on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget to tune in to the Monday and Thursday night podcast, let alone this Premier League show, the fantasy show, the panel show, pre-match shows, post-match shows, and I'm probably forgetting a show or two. For myself and Bickler, thank you for watching. We appreciate you as always. We will be back next week. And, of course, have a great week, and we'll talk to you all soon.